With older photos, it is quite common to see uneven lighting across the image. You can see over on the left side of the image, for example, on the hillside here, there's an area that looks a little bit bright, and the foreground overall seems a bit bright as well. In many cases, this might simply be an exposure issue. For example, a lot of reflected light in the foreground causing the lower half of this image to seem very bright. But sometimes it can be caused by problems with the printing or the emulsion or even the film. And whatever the cause, it can be helpful to adjust these areas of the photo. And in these types of situations, what I'll often do is apply a dodging and burning effect to the image, where I can brighten or darken specific areas of the photo simply by painting on it. The first step is to create a new layer for that dodging and burning, but not just any layer. So instead of just clicking on the Create New Layer button, the blank sheet of paper icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, I'm going to hold the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Macintosh while clicking on that layer. That will cause a new layer dialog to appear where I can adjust the properties for the new layer that I'm adding. I'll go ahead and type a name. I'll just call this Dodge and Burn, and I'm going to change the blend mode to overlay. And that is perhaps the most important aspect here, is changing that blend mode to overlay, which will give us the behavior that we're looking for. We'll see that in just a moment. I'll go ahead and turn on the checkbox to fill this layer with the overlay neutral color, which is 50% gray. And I'll show you the benefit of filling this layer with gray in just a moment. First, I'll go ahead and click the OK button in order to create this layer that again is called Dodge and Burn, that has the blend mode set to overlay, and that's filled with gray. Once I click OK, you'll see that I have my Dodge and Burn layer created on my Layers panel. It is filled with middle gray, and the blend mode has been changed to overlay. The next step is to choose the brush tool. That's right, we're going to use the brush tool for this dodging and burning technique rather than the dodge and burn tools that are already included in Photoshop. And so I'll choose the brush tool and then make sure that I'm working with a soft-edged brush. You can see that I have some circular brushes that are very fuzzy as opposed to crisp. I can choose one of those and then make sure that the hardness value is all the way to the left at a 0% value. I'll make sure that the blend mode for the brush itself is set to normal. The overlay blend mode is used for the layer, not for the brush itself. And then finally, I'll adjust the opacity. I can use the pop-up here in order to bring up a slider, but I'll generally simply press a number on the keyboard. The number 1 will give me 10%, the number 2 will give me 20%. If I type 1.5 quickly, that will give me 15%, but in most cases, I'll work with an opacity setting of 10%. I'll then make sure that the colors are set to black and white. You can see those at the bottom of the toolbox, black for the foreground color and white for the background color. It's a good idea to simply press the letter D on your keyboard for defaults so that you have these colors set. Sometimes you might have a shade of gray that looks nearly black or white, for example, and it's best to get a consistent result. You can switch between these colors by pressing X for exchange on the keyboard. In this case, I need to darken up some areas of the photo, so I'll make sure that the foreground color is set to black. I'll then move my mouse out over the image and adjust the brush size using the left and right square bracket keys. The right square bracket will increase the brush size, and the left square bracket will decrease the brush size. And so with black as my foreground color and the opacity at 10%, I can adjust my brush size and then paint into this area of the hillside that's looking a little bit bright. I can also increase the brush size here and paint into the foreground area of the photo. Now keep in mind that areas that are white are not going to be affected and areas that are black are not going to be affected. We're only adjusting shades of gray, and sometimes the effect might seem a bit subtle. You'll notice here, for example, as I'm painting, that we're not really seeing a very obvious effect, and yet if I turn off the visibility for the dodge and burn layer and then turn it back on again, you can see a relatively strong effect. Not a huge impact on the image, but certainly a little bit of a darkening. You can always increase the opacity and paint again, and in fact, painting multiple strokes over the same area will increase the impact in that area. That can be a very good thing if you want to paint multiple strokes in order to increase the effect in an area, but it's also important to keep in mind that if you want an even effect in the photo, you need to keep that mouse button held down while you paint over that entire area before releasing the mouse. Now, I mentioned that it was helpful to have the layer filled with gray. The reason for that is that sometimes you might find it helpful to evaluate the areas that you've been painting. And if you have a checkerboard pattern that's associated with a transparent layer, it's not quite as easy to see the relatively subtle paint strokes that you're painting. By having that gray background, we're able to very clearly see even areas that did not get much of an effect in the photo. I'll go ahead and turn on the visibility for the background image layer, and then once again I'll toggle the visibility of the dodge and burn layer so that we can see very clearly the effect in the image. So by working on a separate layer and using the overlay blend mode, we're able to lighten or darken specific areas of the photo. I can paint with white to lighten and black to darken as I continue fine-tuning the overall luminance values in my photo.